right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call this meeting to order. Hopefully, if we've got any. Okay, good. You know, everybody's found a seat that wants a seat. There are a couple other these chairs there. If anybody doesn't want to stand, I don't want y'all to have to if you don't want to. Call this meeting of the full committee of Ways and Means to order for March 7th, 4 o'clock meeting that was advertised. Mr. Secretary, believe it or not, this late in the game, we still have a couple of first readers.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sure they will get full consideration during this session. HB 1540, to amend Title 48 relating to revenue and taxation so as to provide for periodic tax expenditure reports.
We'll sign that one to Chairman Scott in the Public Finance sub.
HB 1551, Title 48 relating to taxation of brownfield property.
That'll go to our ad valorem subcommittee with Chairman Royal. Okay, do I have a report from Chairman Royal on House Bill 1495, Mr. Chairman? Chair recognizes Representative Calvin Hill for the purpose of presenting his bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have in your packet a one-page entitled House Bill 1495, which is a brief summation of this. House Bill 1495 just cleans up the debt issuance report, making the information useful to local governments that will be issuing debts, bonds, etc. This is important to local governments so they'll be able to ensure their costs are in line with other governments. When they see the DCA, when the DCA reports, they'll be able to look at them equally. If you will notice on the bill itself, on line 22 through 24, we have ensured that the proceeds for the bond issuance costs will include the underwriter's discount and all costs as reported to the United States Department of Treasury, to the IRS. This ensures that all costs will be reported equally, and it'll give a good benchmarking for the debt issuance costs. The only other change that's required is the type of debt, which is up on line 19 and 20. The bottom line, this bill will ensure that taxpayers do not overpay when their local government issues debt, and that's the ultimate goal in this, because sometimes you're dealing with unsophisticated groups like school boards that may not fully understand bonds and may not be able to fully look at their costs, and this just equates them across the board. That's it.
Well, the gentleman yield for questions, members of the committee.
Absolutely, sir.
As I understand it, this will allow us to collect, or we're collecting a lot of this data now, but really don't know how to interpret it because we're getting different definitions of what issuance costs are from different sources, and this is just going to standardize the term issuance costs so that we can compare an apple to an apple
That
and
would
an
be
orange
correct,
to an
Mr.
orange.
Chairman, and that's why we referenced the IRS form. They'll all have to be listed with the same conditions.
On the same page, and I certainly think that this is good legislation. Any members of the committee have a question for the presenter? Okay. Hearing none, any members of the committee wish to make any comments on the legislation? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the proposition, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Measure carries. We'll report it to rules tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Chairman Lewis, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 111? Oh, excuse me, Chairman Sims. Are you here? There you are.
Yes, sir. I've got
It's Chairman Lewis's bill. My apologies.
Mr. Chairman, your sales tax subcommittee did pass House Bill 111 by committee substitute and has remanded it to the full committee.
Chair recognizes Chairman Jeff Lewis, purpose of presenting House Bill 111 to the full committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very technical bill, very simple bill. It's a department bill, but I was given the pleasure of trying to present this before the full committee, and I'm going to do that. This is known as the Contractor Retainage Bill, And quite simply, this bill removes a prime or general contractor's requirement to withhold retainage if the contract up to about 2% of the contract amount on contracts if those amounts of the contract exceed $250,000, or the requirement for a bond for sale and use tax purposes on resident subcontractors. Resident subcontractors primarily purchase items here in Georgia from Georgia suppliers that impose the proper sales tax at the time of purchase. This bill would significantly reduce the work required on both general and prime contractors, as well as the Department of Revenue. It removes a burdensome process from the contracting industry for resident subcontractors and serves to improve the efficiency of the department by reducing the cost that it takes to administer this statute. And the requirement for a general or prime contractor to withhold retainage or require a bond on non-resident contractors is not being changed. So they still have to be bonded. Non-resident contractors bring items and machinery in here into Georgia that might result in a use tax liability. In the event the non-resident contractor does not properly file and remit Georgia use tax on those purchases, the retainage is applied to the subcontractor's tax liability. And then finally, it puts in the statute the definition of a non-resident subcontractor, clarifies that definition. And Mr. Chairman, that's my brief explanation of this. And if there's any questions, there's very capable people here who can answer it.
Will the gentleman yield to questions? It's my understanding that the bill seeks to remove a whole layer of compliance cost and expense to our business community, and it's also a very business-friendly piece of legislation that allows our contracting community to be on an even field with interstate contracts and others to where our folks can compete nationally. Is that a fairly good summary?
That's my understanding also, Mr. Chairman.
Other
well
questions, any member of the committee for the presenter? Or any comments from any members of the committee on the legislation? That's House Bill 111. Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? 111. Hearing none, all in favor of the proposition, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. The bill carries. You just wowed us again, Chairman Lewis. That's good. Very good. Income tax. Chairman Lewis, while we have you up front there from the Income Tax Subcommittee, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 429?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Your Income Tax Subcommittee met, and we recommend to the full committee that House Bill 429 do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Chairman Tommy Smith for the purpose of presenting his bill. Chairman Smith, if you want to just have a seat here or stand, whichever you prefer. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As you well know, Section 1 provides a number of organizations and state agencies now that can work through the Department of Revenue with debt collection when there's bad debt, and there have, under the last several years, the public housing authorities has been hit real hard with a loss of revenue on the federal level. They're not asking us to put any money in their budget, but they are asking us to include them along with the ones listed in Section 1 to take advantage of that opportunity. And that's really all that it does. It adds them to that list. And I'm really not an expert on the technicalities of all this, but I have Mr. Bill Fallon with me, who is. If we need to, if you ask a question I can't answer, maybe I can defer it to him.
Gentlemen, yield for questions from the committee. Members of the committee have any questions for the presenter? No one in this entire...
I got one question.
Chair recognizes Representative Sims.
Representative, this may be directed to the chair. I just wondered, is this for debt collection of taxes?
No, it's actually debt collection of unpaid rents and or damage fees by the Revenue Department as a set-off against tax refunds that may be due from the Revenue Department.
Oh, I see.
There has been a history of that, but only with state agencies. This would be the first time that it wouldn't be a state agency. But
federal.
essentially, it allows our housing authorities to use garnishment powers by the Revenue Department. I would have to tell you honestly, the Revenue Department was not tickled about this prospect at all. It adds a good bit of burden, and there's no funding that goes to them for the people that might be necessary to carry this out. But it's still probably long term a good idea, but because we're refunding people's money, and we're talking about a lot of times a $50 copay on a $800 a month apartment or something like that,
Yes.
and we can't even collect those from folks.
I understand.
So I hope that
I'm
answers
just
your
wondering.
question.
So it's basically for the entitlement of the refund back that they're trying to garnish. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially, they want to lien the refunds that the state would be paying back, and supposedly there's this database that they can get into. I think there are a lot of details from a privacy standpoint that are going to have to be worked out because these are private citizens. The other group of this list in many cases are state agencies, which is a little bit of a difference, but that's
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
what the bill's about. Any further questions? Any comments on the bill from anybody? What's the pleasure of the committee? I got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Matter passes to the full committee. Okay. Yes, ma'am. We actually had the pleasure of hearing from Ms. Glover this morning in the subcommittee, and I too, like you, am delighted to welcome her back this afternoon. I certainly was impressed and inspired by all that she had to say, and we saw some wonderful pictures of some of the great success stories, and we welcome you to our committee, and in your capital, we thank you for all you do for our state. Chairman Royal from the Ad Valorem Tax Committee, do you have a recommendation of the full committee on House Bill 848, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. The Ad Valorem Tax Subcommittee met and came out with a do-pass recommendation on House Bill 848.
Chairman recognizes Representative Butler. If you can come around, you can either stand or sit here, and please present your bill.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 848 calls for a referendum in November for the general election in order to eliminate the state portion of property tax for seniors 65 and over. This applies to a house, the personal residence, and only up to 10 acres. You must be a resident of the state of Georgia. This only affects the state portion of property tax. It does not affect any of your local property taxes.
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes.
Was there a fiscal note that went along with this proposition?
Yes, there is. And
what do you expect that will be the burden against the budget?
Well, if it were to pass, it would not affect. It wouldn't start to have any effect until the FY08, and according to their figures, it would be a revenue loss of $6.8 million.
Does the gentleman have any idea what that might be worth on a senior per senior basis? What savings each, as an average, maybe each of our seniors that we certainly want to?
Well, if you go by the figures they said the average value of an owner-occupied home in 2007 is what they're saying is $156,000, and by using that figure, they said it would result in savings of about $14.37 per household.
Per household. Well, something to look forward to. We need to live to get to be at least 65 if this passes, and we're going to get a gigantic raise then. I'm tickled with that. Yeah. I'm just afraid by then I'll have to.
Well, you know, it's all about chipping away at the stone.
Well, if you could reduce the age a little bit, I'm afraid when I'm that age, I may have to just buy stuff and won't be that much fun with it. But is there any other questions? Any other questions from members of the committee? Depends and that kind of thing. Yeah. Any members of the committee have a question for the presenter? Any members of the committee wish to be? Oh, question. Okay. Chair recognizes Representative Sims.
This is the enabling legislation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is there a House resolution that follows along with this?
This is not a constitutional amendment.
Not a constitutional amendment.
No.
Just a referendum. Okay. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative ORROCK.
Well, the fiscal note says the bill calls for a referendum to amend the state constitution. That's what the fiscal note says. So we might need to clarify that. And I did have another question, but we probably want to clear this up before.
Well,
It is a constitutional amendment. It would have to be.
I don't think it is a constitutional amendment, though.
So it looks like an error in the fiscal note then, in the text of the fiscal note.
You're LC 18. Yes. That's what I thought.
He's actually Joe.
There was actually a companion bill this would have dropped at the same time, which did not fall through, and it would have actually totally done away with the state property tax. Now, that did require a constitution, and it did have a companion resolution to it, but we never went forward with that.
Before I recognize you, I think this is a real good time. And a lot of times we don't stop and do this enough, but we've been at it now, what is this, 28th day or something like that, and this committee especially, I know, has handled a tremendous amount of legislation, and I think this is a great example of how fortunate we are to have who I consider to probably be the finest legal counsel any committee could ever have, and just having Joe Sawyer here with us, and we don't ever get a chance. Y'all, before you leave today, walk by and say thank you. I mean, he does an outstanding job for us. Very few will ever be as committed as he's been, and I mean that in every sense of the word, and we appreciate you, Joe. We really do. Chair recognizes Representative ORROCK.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask the author, this effect of this bill would be to relieve all people 65 and up of state property tax.
That's correct.
And I wonder if you thought of the option of having a means-tested approach to this, which has been typical in a lot of counties on homestead exemption, for example, that it is addressed to income levels, because it's hard for me to make a policy case for why somebody over 65, simply by virtue of their age, no longer pays that tax when they may have an income. They may have an income of $500,000 or $1 million, or assets that may be worth all the gold and all the tea in China. So what's the policy argument for relieving anybody just because they're over 65 of paying a state?
Well, I'm going to assume that this person is 65 that you're referring to that you don't think deserves it. I think they've probably paid a good bit of property tax over these years, and I think they do deserve it once they get to that age. I don't think that we should put any kind of restriction on somebody just because they make X amount of dollars. They have a piece of property worth X amount of dollars. I believe I think it's a fair and reasonable bill, and I would not consider, or I would not want it amended to have a means test depending on income.
Other questions for the presenter? Chair recognizes Representative Roberts.
I have to agree with Representative Butler on this. I know that people might find it astonishing.
Is that a question?
ORROCK and I might disagree on that.
I'm shocked. In fact, let me give you
But
Is there a question in this?
no, sir. It's more or less a statement. I'm sorry. But I applaud him for bringing this forward because I do think this is a generation, no matter how much they've made, has given so much back to us, and anything we can do, we need to help them.
Well, I thank Representative Roberts for our segue into comment time.
Is that not true,
Are
Mr.
there
Chairman?
are there other members of the committee that wish to comment on the legislation? Yes, I will recognize you for the purpose of a comment on the legislation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think this is good. We've done this in the city of Woodstock, and we did it in Cherokee County, and it does, even though it's a small amount, it helps folks that are on a fixed income. So I do applaud the author for it. So.
Other comments, follow-ups? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the proposition? Oh, is that right? Bless you. You got some water. There's some water over there. Okay, good. All in favor? Well, after all, this is the new Georgia. So, all in favor of the proposition, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. We have one nay. Bill carries. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee.
Chairman Royal, do you have a report to the committee on House Bill 1144, please, sir?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Your ad valorem tax subcommittee met on House Bill 1144 and had a due pass recommendation to the full committee.
Chair recognizes Representative Chambers to present House Bill 1144.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I did bring some nice... Thank you, Representative Sims. I did bring some nice color handouts for those members who were not here earlier. There's also a fiscal note in your folders, from what I understand. House Bill 1144 is clarifying the definition of a private enterprise agreement. This particular legislation will help create better affordable housing for low-income Georgians by increasing the opportunity to utilize private investment dollars instead of tax dollars. It does create better housing, as you can see from the very descriptive photographs provided by the Atlanta Housing Authority. It does generate additional tax revenue because the communities in and around these developments are much vitalized by these beautiful communities. The additional quality affordable housing is at no additional cost to the taxpayers. By leveraging private investment, we can also bring down more federal dollars to help subsidize this. If there are any questions, I would like to acknowledge the work that Representative ORROCK has put into this subject in the past, and she's been very helpful in advising on this as well.
All right. I hope that. Would the lady yield for questions?
Yes, sir.
Any member of the committee have a question for the presenter?
Mr. Chairman, I think just
get your microphone if you would.
Just in terms of applaud the author for bringing the legislation, and this does apply the statewide.
Yes, ma'am, it does.
And clarify that.
And there are other projects like this going on all over the state.
This certainly is, lady, isn't it true, has been an astounding success story, and what it's created. If the general public could see these beautiful photographs of these facilities, the before and after look is a whole new pride of ownership in the public housing arena, and it also provides that family or person in public housing the opportunity to seamlessly stay essentially in a home environment with the pride of ownership, and we've seen statistically, because of that pride of ownership and not isolated onto a group of basically like a lepers colony or something, which was the old way it was done. We've seen that the maintenance of the projects has been a tremendous savings to the taxpayers and also to the local governments that would otherwise have to maintain situations around the projects that would cause for more law enforcement or cleanup and all that sort of stuff that went with blighted communities. And as we said at subcommittee this morning, our friends from at least the Atlanta Housing Authority were here with us today, and they've been working hand in hand for years and years and years to elevate the general reputation of public housing. And I wish the public could see the pictures. They're phenomenal. Representative Shine.
Okay, take the mic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got what I'm going to consider quite a bit of background in the low-income housing issue. Dr. Glover may not remember the Atlanta Mortgage Consortium, but we did do a lot of the early units. It was a consortium of banks that did low-income housing. What I was going to ask the author was, when these projects go through, are the individuals living there given an opportunity to purchase the unit that they are going to be renting? And the reason I ask that is that consortium did work with the Atlanta Housing Authority in two major projects where the individuals had built up down payment assistance over several years, as well as rehab, things to fix the roof and all that, and they used that for down payment to buy the units and got mortgages. Do you know if that's part of the private partnership?
It's my understanding that these are rental communities, but with the committee's indulgence and the chairman's indulgence, I'd be happy to allow Ms. Glover to answer that. If any of these particular properties under her control.
We typically don't take testimony in full committee, but if you want to turn to and ask her and then testify, that's
Okay.
fine with us.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just, the reason I ask and mention that is there is nothing that will improve any community more than the actual ownership of a home or a unit. That's why I ask.
I was correct, Representative Scheid, that these are rental units, but as part of the overall master plan, there will be some for-purchase properties developed in the future.
Representative Sims.
My question, basically, to the good lady that's brought this bill, I think it's great legislation. On the M&O, the maintenance and operations, where directly does that money come from? Are those state or federal funds that are going to be maintaining the buildings and maintaining the grounds and those kinds of things, or is that going to be the rent that these folks pay? Is that going to go toward M&O, or can you let me know a little bit about how that rolls?
Actually, it is. I can answer that if you want me to for you. You've got a blended rent here. You've got private renters that are not low-income people at all. The typical mix is about 30-70 of the low-income, 70 of high. If you look at the caliber of the communities, you can see why they would be so sought after. And obviously the rents are gauged. A component of that is the ongoing maintenance and operation in both the subsidies and the contributory part of the low-income renter, as well as the standard at market renter. It's going to be contemplated in the rents with reasonable contemplation of future cost increases, for periods of time.
Follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
So there's no significant offset. This basically goes in sort of a general fund. They pay that out of the rent. You don't say that this monies are going to be set aside for M&O, somewhat like our monies are now for SPLOST and LOST and those kinds of things. There's nothing in the statement that says, well, we're just going to use this money for M&O and this money for capital improvement, or is that just basically a general fund?
The only bifurcation of M&O after the fact is from the assisted patrons of it, which would be coming in the form of rental assistance through the federal programs like Section 8 and so forth. And it's contemplated in there a portion of the entire amount of rent subsidy would go toward the M&O, and then there would be a contribution by the others. The initial development of the projects is typically done by bonds, and it's typically credit enhanced in most cases by HUD, but with these partnerships there are lots of other potential business scenarios that sometimes make more sense, and part of the actual bond issuance and the raises are working capital, for the ongoing nature of the project. They're typically over 100% financing, because what the government really offers, rather than grant money, is essentially the credit enhancement to exceed the normal underwriting criteria of only loaning 80% of what something really costs. They'll loan 105%, and some of it will be ongoing maintenance funding to take care of deferred maintenance ahead of time, and it's projected in the bonds. But also in the rental subsidies, there's other things, and it's really a double assurance of maintenance, so that we won't have future blight and we won't have future problems. And I thank the gentleman for the question.
I think you knew where I was going with it.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Orrock.
Mr. Chairman, are you taking comments as well as questions at this time?
We could just segue right into those if
Thank
you'd
you.
like to make one. If you can limit that to a minute or two, we'd appreciate
Surely.
it.
I just wanted to point out we have some very attractive pictures that the author has shared with us, and these are all within the city of Atlanta, and all completed over the last less than a decade. And I just wanted to point out that as far as having this be an approach, this language change has been needed for some time, and so we're overdue in doing it. And but as far as the success of these communities, in addition, Mr. Chairman, to all the things that you've pointed out about the mixed income community, is that there's been a great partnership, and I think the language of this bill addresses partnership with for-profit entities and with the nonprofit. For example, one of the first ones that we did was the Centennial Place, which was the old Techwood Homes, the first housing project in the country that was built. And we have over there a first-class library, a first-class new elementary school, a community center, a YWCA, child care services. So it's an effort to take a blighted community, bring it back on the tax rolls, and provide communities that are win-win for those of different level incomes. And this partnership of all these other nonprofits, as well as the for-profit entity, has been critical to that. So I again applaud the author.
Thank you, ma'am. Other comments from members of the committee? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the proposition, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. We thank you, Representative Chambers, for a great job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Our Chairman Lewis of Income Tax, give a report to the full committee on House Bill 1160, please, sir.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Your subcommittee on income tax met regarding House Bill 1160, and must confess it was a most interesting and fun topic to deal with, and after careful consideration, we recommend it do pass by committee substitute to the full committee.
Chair recognizes Representative Thunder Tumlin to present House Bill 1160. Welcome, Representative Tumlin.
Well, thank y'all very much. I'm obviously not David Knight, but I would like just to present this bill for him. He's in another committee meeting. David Knight. Basically, this bill addresses two areas. One, a sense of fairness and parity between similar type entities, and whether or not Georgia taxpayers pay double taxation on the same income. In looking at 48.727, this is the section we're trying to amend deals with adjustment to income. Currently, under Georgia law, and I'm going to read from the instructions of the Form 500 of the Georgia Code, that you can, subchapter S, and let me find it here. Georgia residents may make an adjustment to federal adjusted gross income for subchapter S income where the subchapter S election is not recognized by Georgia and other states. And with this, I'm going to give Tennessee as an example. They tax all entities as if they're a corporation. They ignore whether or not they're a limited partnership, whether or not they're subchapter S, whether or not they're an LLC. And so their tax is a corporation, and there's no, so an individual in Georgia is a member in an LLC, or that's a shareholder in a subchapter S, has to pay income on that same income in two states. This original bill was made in 1987, this particular code section, which was some 5 years before we even created LLCs. And so what happened was LLCs weren't even contemplated at the time. LLCs are probably the predominant new entity that comes into place. So LLCs just aren't treated with the same sense of fairness as Subchapter S corporations are. They're both pass-throughs, but because they came after this was enacted, they're just not subject to it.
Without this legislation, we actually have Georgia taxpayers being taxed twice for the same income. Isn't that true? If they're doing business in an interstate manner.
That's true.
And this is an attempt by you, the CPA organization, and the Revenue Department, really, of Georgia, to try to interject some fairness into our tax system for our Georgia citizens. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Other questions for the presenter?
If I may, could I brought Mr. Brad Dixon, a CPA with Tarpon and Underwood, who worked with the Georgia Society, and David Knight and myself to bring this. This is also a Georgia Society of CPAs issue, and just want to thank them for their help too.
We'd like to thank you and welcome to our committee. We appreciate you being here. Any questions for the presenter? This fine legislation. All right, Representative ORROCK.
Thank you, and I don't want to be unfair to the presenter because he didn't author the bill. The chairman of the subcommittee may have the answer to this, but was there any opposition to the bill, or anybody that raised unreadiness around it?
In the subcommittee meeting, there was not.
In subcommittee, there was no opposition. I believe this passed out unanimously.
There was a bit of discussion, though, in
committee. We didn't have them lined up wanting to pay double taxes this morning.
That's what the vice chairman just
even though I know they could have got us some great programs. I understand that. Yeah, but we weren't able.
There are those that sometimes express discomfort at continuing to lower the revenues that come to the state to take care of the people's business.
I understand, and we did discuss the fiscal note over the next 5 years. It's expected this will be about a $25 million hit to the budget, but it's hard to call something a hit, which is a fundamentally unfairness issue to begin with. We want to encourage our Georgia businesses to do well, and we'll get our fair share of that as tax collectors, I'm sure, when they're doing well. It's when they're not doing well and we tax them too that it's a hard pill for us to ask our citizens to swallow. I think Representative Tumlin, who is also a CPA in his own right and an attorney in his own right, for his great assistance with this bill. Chair recognizes Representative Sims.
Is it not true also, Mr. Chairman, that by giving this money back to investors, to taxpayers, that they may invest, and that then those investments would also be tax-paying entities, such as income, such as property, such as sales?
You really probably ought to stick to the funeral business, Representative Sims.
Well, I'm just trying to help that revenue of the state, Mr. Chairman.
Now you
always help me. I always bury your mistakes.
There is no question that working capital is the lifeblood, especially of small business. And when you can retain it in your business and you're not double taxed unfairly, it actually gives you a chance to be successful in business. And in my opinion, that's kind of what America's all about. And again, that's the reason this kind of legislation and pointing out these inequities and unfairnesses in our code, I think, are so important to this state. And I certainly commend Representative Knight, who couldn't be here with us, also a CPA, and Representative Tumlin and others that brought this for this fine legislation. Are there any other comments from members of the committee? If hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion to second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Chairman Sims, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 1244?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Your sales tax subcommittee took up House Bill 1244 by Representative Scott and did pass it by committee substitute.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the secretary of our committee and also the author of House Bill 1244, Representative Scott. Present the bill, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'll try to be brief here. HB 384 was actually introduced by our chairman last year as a measure to extend an exemption from motor fuel tax to mass transit buses in this state. what HB 1244 attempts to do is to add to that the smaller minibuses and minivans that are around this state in our rural areas that accomplish roughly the same task in our smaller hometown areas, smaller rural areas. This Part 1 accomplishes that, and we had some issues that we had to work out in terms of how these buses were going to get this exemption and how it was going to be reported. And once we worked out where they purchased the fuel, we were able to get revenue satisfaction that they were able to account for these exemptions. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and I ask for your favorable consideration.
I apologize to the presenter. That was a fine presentation.
I'm sure it was, Mr. Chairman. I cut out about 3 paragraphs there.
In the interest of fairness to you and the sophisticated nature of the legislation you're bringing, I didn't get a lot of that.
Mr. Chairman, this extends the
I would ask you
motor
for
fuel.
one more summary of that.
Sure. Quite simple, Mr. Chairman. It extends the same motor fuel sales tax exemption that Greta and Marta and the other buses, the large buses in the rural urban areas, to our rural bus systems, such as, for example, the Walker County Transit or the Gordon County Transit or any of those others around the state. And in addition to that, it also provides for the same type of sales tax exemption for any campus bus system. That's any campus bus system in the state of Georgia that purchases its fuel through a bulk fueling facility and offers free transfers to another local transit system. Mr. Chairman, this will reduce revenue in the state of Georgia by roughly $495,000.
Does it have any local effect?
No, sir, it does not. It extends only to the first and second motor fuel tax.
It sends a message that it is a policy of this state to favor mass transit. We see that as an efficient mode of transportation. We see that as an environmentally friendly mode of transportation rather than everybody having one car trying to get everywhere. We see it in many cases as a safer mode, and it's part of the message that's being sent. Are there any questions for the presenter of the legislation? I have a motion from Representative Teague. Do pass.
Second.
I have a second.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, before we do that, could I just offer one thing? I was reminded, something that was called a moment ago is a small technical error. And if you'll notice on line 12, page 1, it says, as defined in paragraph 9 of Code Section 4892, if you will skip down to line 20, where it says subsection A, it should say paragraph 9, just as it says on line 12, and I have confirmed this for Legislative Council, and I would ask your indulgence to waive print and allow us to make that technical error change at this time and pass this as a committee substitute.
So your amendment would be to change line 20, remove the word subsection, and then
subsection
A and paren, and replace therein paragraph paren 9 into paren of code section. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any objection from the committee? Hearing none, that's in. We'll now be voting on a committee sub, but I would ask before we can do that, a motion to waive print.
I move.
Got a motion, a second. Is there any objection? I think if there's any objection at all, we cannot do that. Hearing none, we're waiving print. So we're now voting on a committee sub, House Bill 1244, as was amended, and we have waived the reprint of that. And we have a motion now for the committee sub. Move do pass, and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor of the proposition, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, our representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Sims, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 14-0? Well, before I do that, is there anyone in the audience that's here to present that has other pressing? We're probably 15, 20 minutes away from being finished at the most, but I want to accommodate anybody's schedule. Our order here was random. I'd be happy to. Thank you for your indulgence in the wait. We had a long calendar today. I appreciate everybody's patience. Chairman Sims, do you have a report on House Bill 1403?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, your sales tax subcommittee was presented House Bill 1403 by Representative Martin. We did pass by committee substitute to the full committee.
Chair recognizes our Vice Chairman to present his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. We're working off House Bill 1403, LC 149454S. What this bill seeks to do, Mr. Chairman, is to address the inequity that currently exists related to the creation of a new municipality within a county such as Fulton. In fact, that's the only place where a new municipality has been created, and the only place where this would apply. What this simply seeks to do is to continue the definition of new qualified municipality as was defined in House Bill, I believe it was House Bill 36 last year, and add a new definition for newly expanded qualified municipality as defined on lines 23 through 25 on page 1, and that is a currently existing municipality in a county where a new qualified municipality exists that has increased in population by more than 15% since the last census through one or more annexations. The reason this is necessary and provides equity is because as the cities were created, or the city was created and two more are in process, if they are created, it leaves pockets of citizens in North Fulton County that have been annexed, have been or will be potentially annexed by the cities of Alpharetta and Roswell, so as to provide them services adequately. And this seeks to basically give those two jurisdictions, should they meet the 15% threshold, the same allocation of lost local option sales tax that a newly created municipality, qualified created municipality, would do. On page 2, lines 3 through 7 is really the language that makes sure that this, only happens when there exists a make sure I say it exactly right, when there exists a new qualified municipality. So this code section would not apply unless there was a new qualified municipality. That's defined on lines 3 through 7. The rest of the changes in the language simply seek to add the definition of newly expanded qualified municipality in each place where a new qualified municipality currently exists through the remainder of page 2. And outlines the same scenario for the allocation of the loss that would happen for the new qualified municipality. And the last major change on page 3, lines 3 through 7, basically defined how the newly expanded qualified municipality would receive their tax allocation, and that is in the same manner which was outlined in House Bill 36 last year for the a new qualified municipality. Again, the idea for this is loss was passed in Fulton County by the voters to roll back ad valorem tax, and we think it is fair that loss goes with the most local jurisdiction. So as those people are annexed or go into created cities, that loss money would follow them into their newly expanded qualified municipality should they reach the 15% threshold, so that those cities could roll back their millage accordingly. I'd answer any questions if there are questions of the committee.
Gentlemen, is yielded for any questions. Any members of the committee have any questions? You are recognized for a question.
In the subcommittee, was there testimony from Fulton County or from the ACCG or GMA, and any light shed on this topic by any of the affected entities?
I saw members of ACCG and GMA at that meeting, and no one requested to speak on the bill. I've spoken with both of them on the bill. They inquired of me of the bill.
And as Fulton County would, of course, be a party to this, be impacted in terms of the distribution is accomplished by the county. Is that right? It's collected by the county?
The loss is collected. I think all loss is collected by the county.
And did you speak with the?
I have not spoken with
Fulton
I have not spoken with Fulton County today. I talked to them earlier about my intention to address this issue. I would suspect, just being perfectly candid with the committee, I believe Fulton County opposed House Bill 36 and 37 last year, and would suspect they would be in opposition to this. But with due respect to their position, this allows loss to track to where people live so that their property taxes can be rolled back accordingly.
And did you have a discussion with the Fulton delegation, the 18 or 27, however many people were in that delegation?
No, ma'am, I didn't.
Because this is the first time I'm aware of this.
I have a question for the author and a little bit of a concern, and hopefully you can give me some assurance. Earlier today when I read the bill, I understood it differently than I do now, unfortunately, because I thought it really only applied to Fulton County as the way it was drawn, because there's really no other county that I'm aware of that chartered a new city. But it does seem to potentially apply to several other counties because of the newly expanded qualified municipality definition in here. And I live in a high-growth community, Houston County, and it would not be out of the question that we could grow by 15%. Now, when we presented our loss to our voters, we guaranteed them a dollar-for-dollar rollback against our school tax. Our folks in Houston County are very happy with the lost referendum that we passed, with the assurance that it all rolls back, that it's not used in M&O. Can you assure me and others on this committee that it would be an equal distribution of the loss, and it would always be a rollback against the property tax, as it's worded in the bill now in any community in the state of Georgia, so as not to have deceived the people that voted on the loss with the assurance that it would be a rollback? This wouldn't change that in the middle of the stream?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, first, if I can address your concern with this applying to, for instance, your community. I believe on line 3, 4, and 5 on page 2, notwithstanding any provisions of this code section, it says if there exists within the special tax district. So, in our case, if there exists within Fulton County's unincorporated SSD, where this tax would be authorized and is imposed, a new qualified municipality. So only if a new qualified municipality exists would the rest of this code section apply. So says Mr. Brumby, who helped me in the drafting of this legislation. So this would not apply, the definition of this code section would not apply for the newly expanded, I want to make sure I've got it right, newly expanded qualified municipality would not be activated unless there was a new qualified municipality within the special district where this tax authorized by this section would apply. That's my information from the Legislative Council.
Well, I don't know that Mr. Brumby's here, but as I read the bill, it does say or a newly expanded qualified municipality, which is defined as any municipality, not necessarily in Fulton County, that's had by annexation a growth of 15% or more. That seems to me to open up the can, unless I can't read right or something, or both, it says. And that's on line 7, so that I'm looking for some assurance that this won't affect citizens that have voted on a loss in reliance that it would be 100% rollback against their property taxes. And I don't care if it's at the city level or the county level. I just don't want it to be a tax increase for M&O, a backdoor tax increase for M&O is what my concern is, and maybe it's not one of validity. Chairman Royal, I know you are an expert in this state on ad valorem taxation. Are you reading any of this the same way I am, or am I just off base? We'd love to defer to you, Joe. Okay, you're right. Thank you for pointing that out. I read right over that. I stand corrected. Other questions of the author? Anybody have? Yeah, Representative Teague.
Tell me exactly what you want to do to South Fulton County with this bill.
Not a thing.
No. Tax-wise, we're talking about creating new cities. This is only pertaining to Fulton County, where there have been new cities, a new city. Well, we're passing bills of another one already. So, for a area that is left in Fulton County, what do you want to do as far as this piece of legislation? How will it touch those citizens?
Well, again, this legislation would allow to go to newly expanded qualified municipalities the same amount of money per capita that would go to new created municipalities, and that would happen if a city was formed in South Fulton or a city in South Fulton expanded or has expanded by more than 15% since the last census. They would also be available to get their additional loss funds under this legislation. There's not a thing in here that directs it to North Fulton or South Fulton. In fact, my understanding that there's some people in South Fulton that have had discussions about the creation of a city down there. So it would apply to them as well.
So you're talking about the taxes that's raised in a particular area. Okay. The taxes that are
Steve, could I ask you to speak up? The rest of the committee can't hear you.
Okay.
Could you speak up?
Excuse me. Tax money. Can you hear me now?
The microphone's on. She has it on.
Now, with the tax base of Fulton County, you're talking about taxing or doing rollbacks in areas like South Fulton County. The money would stay, if we had a city of South Fulton County, it would stay in South Fulton County, and so you roll it back from the county which presently is receiving the money. Is correct?
No. What happens with loss now? It's distributed according to a certificate in House Bill 36 last year. Set forth a manner in which, if a new city was created, that their percentage prorated by population of the loss, the local option sales tax that the county received, would go to that city for a millage rate rollback within the city, because that's what loss is supposed to be available for in the county today. So if a city were to be created in South Fulton, or if a newly expanded qualified municipality, as defined here, a city in South Fulton, or any place in Fulton, were to grow more than 15% since the last census, they would qualify here. They would be able to receive their lost money and roll back their millage rate as is required by the loss referendum when it was originally passed.
I guess I need to get with the 15%. What yeah.
Yes, ma'am. If I may, I don't mean to cut you off, but the reason I'm not sure that any city in Fulton County qualifies to that 15% growth as yet. The reason I chose 15% was because that's a substantial impact. When you grow a city by annexation by more than 15%, and you have to take your set bucket of money, if you will, and spread over the ad valorem tax base for a millage rate rollback, when you grow that tax base by more than 15% and don't get any additional money to go in it, then in fact you start getting a disproportionate amount of rollback. So rather than to have it say if any annexation took place and make it an administrative burden on the county and or the cities, I chose a 15% threshold. That's a reasonable number when you look at that amount of money to be spread over a tax base. That could be a significant impact to the taxpayers of a qualified expanded municipality. That's where the 15% came from.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Chair recognizes Representative ORROCK.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, the way the language, as I understand it, the descriptor for newly expanded qualified municipality is only limited to growth that is accomplished by annexation.
That is correct.
And what would be the reason for that, since a municipality can grow and have additional population?
The reason we did that...
Could you walk us through that?
Yes, ma'am. The reason we did it, growth through annexation is because we're using a static number of the 2000 census.
Mhm.
It's impossible to capture the amount that Fulton County may have grown, or Palmetto may have grown, or Hapeville may have grown, or Alfred or Roswell by sheer growth, because that has not been yet measured by a census.
I know we have numbers on Atlanta of growth that it was in the high 300s. It's now in the high 400s.
Well,
and so there are there are numbers that come from somewhere.
Certainly, and I think Alpharetta itself was about 34,800, at the census, and I think they're a good deal more than that now. But again, to get a point in time, the reason I wanted to not count Fulton's growth, or Atlanta's growth, or Roswell's growth, or Palmetto's growth, or Hateful's growth, Union City's growth, because they may be measured by different criteria, and it's hard to get a baseline. We have a baseline of the census, and those are just tracts that have been annexed. That census tract exists. We know exactly what population we would be adding.
So it's anticipated that a natural population increase leads to additional funds being collected.
Within a loss, I would say that's fair. Yes, ma'am. That's why they're done proportionate now on percentages, so that as the amount of funds that come into the loss go up, nobody gets a set amount. They all get a percentage. And this bill does not affect the percentage the current cities within the Fulton County get.
It just I'm trying to contemplate if you have a pie, is it staying the same size and you're dividing it by more numbers?
Well,
how's that going to impact the newly created municipality?
Well, again, it would have no effect at all, because the pie, as you referred to, is divided by the cities in Fulton County. That's agreed on by the certificate. The way House Bill 36 passed last year is the Fulton County portion, which is what is being affected by these cities being created or by these annexations, is where the money would be distributed pro rata according to House Bill 36.
Out of the formerly unincorporated. The unincorporated parts of Fulton.
Yes, ma'am, because these people were unincorporated, and now they're going to be incorporated. Yes, ma'am, that's exactly right.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the presenter? Any other comments from members of the committee on the legislation?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Okay.
We have we've got Milton, we've got Johns Creek, we've got assuming they come through from the Senate, we've got South Fulton, and we've got Chattahoochee Hills. Assuming all of those go through and are turned into municipalities, is everybody going to be treated the same under this? That's my understanding, that everybody would be treated the same under this legislation.
I appreciate the gentleman's question. Absolutely. This is a pro rata share based on the populations that would go into those new cities, so you're exactly correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Any comments from members of the committee? Hearing none, what's the pleasure? You wish to make a comment?
Well, it might be, yes, and that is the concern that on the use of the lost funds for which they were intended. Does this bill in any way hamper that? And that, Mr. Chairman, I may be asking your original question from several minutes ago. But
to the lady, this bill is silent to the use of the lost funds. The lost funds are expended now within counties and cities within this taxing jurisdiction as called for by the referendum. This is silent to any changes there. I know in Alpharetta we used it as a dollar-for-dollar millage rate rollback. I think we're required to do that by law. I believe that was the way that the loss was adopted. This language is silent to changing any of the ways those are done. And in fact, this language, I could make an argument, in fact, stays more with the letter of that law, of that language, so that the money, it goes for a proportionate share of millage rate rollback within the most local jurisdiction.
Okay. What's the pleasure of the committee? Motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the proposition signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign?
no.
2 noes. Motion passes. Chairman Royal, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 1452?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Ad valorem tax subcommittee met and recommended a do pass recommendation on House Bill, the committee substitute House Bill 1452.
Chair recognizes Representative Loudermilk to present House Bill 1452.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to present 1452 to you. Also, I have a suggested submitted committee substitute should be in the folder, and I'm going to be speaking on SC number 0132.
S.
Yes, 0132S. It's just one small addition was made to the to this bill to address some minor concerns we had in subcommittee, and I'll address that. And I appreciate the indulgence to hear me at the late hour of the day and during the session, but this was an issue that was brought to my attention by tax commissioners here in the state just recently, and we're able to put this into a bill. Basically, this bill addresses the homestead exemption, specifically regarding individuals who have entered into this country and reside in violation of the federal immigration law. In a nutshell, county tax commissioners, board of assessors have contacted me with an issue where someone who is here illegally has purchased a home, and under, as they read the current code, as far as it defining a resident, they do qualify for a homestead exemption. What this bill simply does is redefines that term resident, and by adding to the existing applicant section, defining an applicant for a homestead exemption, we, instead of trying to rewrite language, want to get language that has already defined residents. So we went to the driver's license section and found definition in there that had already defined, been through the process and defined what legal resident would be, and have put that language into this bill. And doesn't make any change to the homestead exemption itself, just to the definition of an applicant to include that person must be in this country according to U.S. immigration.
Gentlemen, yield for questions?
Yes, sir.
It's my understanding what you're seeking to do here is not afford illegal aliens the opportunity to get a tax break that should be reserved for Georgia law-abiding citizens, which is a homestead exemption. And even though these illegal aliens have been, on occasion, afforded the opportunity to purchase property in this state, in many cases unlawfully, but they get around the system somehow or another, and then even have the audacity to seek a homestead exemption when they're unlawfully to be here, yet they want to call this their home when our law doesn't even recognize their being here. Is that a fair summary?
That's exactly.
Is there and there's some confusion on the part of our tax commissioners out there in Georgia about whether or not they have to condone these exemptions. Is that what you've been told by your constituents?
Yes, sir. That's it. Asking questions of the tax commissioners, basically what's happening is illegal aliens are purchasing homes via cash. A lot of times the mobile homes, the property associated, and according to purchasing them and applying for the homestead exemption according to the laws that we've established. What the code has addressed, or what they'll come in and there is some type of identification proving that they are who they say they are, and often that's a Mexican driver's license. They also bring a power bill or a water bill showing that they do have the property entity at the time. And what the commissioners are looking for is the ability to have documentation or basically to ensure that they are U.S. citizens before they process the application for homestead exemption.
Other questions from members of the committee? Chair recognizes Representative Scott.
We've heard illegal, and then we've heard U.S. citizen. Would somebody that was here on a student visa, if this passed bill, would be exemption?
Yes, if you look at the line 6 on page 2, it says such persons either a
Other questions? Representative ORROCK?
I understand the language on page 2, 5 through 14, which I think addresses the person who is undocumented, who's here without the lawful documentation. But I'm trying to puzzle out what's the purpose of adding the new descriptors on page 1, line 22 to the end of that page, and the first 4 lines of page 2, because those go to questions about having kids in schools and present in the state for 30 days and so on and so forth. What's the point of those? That this bill could do what you want it to do without this language here, as far as I can determine. It looks like this opens up a broader description of who's eligible for an exemption.
Yes, ma'am. That language right there is strictly from residency requirements as we've already established in Georgia Code. This came directly from the driver's license section, which those sections establish. For instance, if you look at page 2, line 3, which I think is part of what you're referencing. Basically, that section there, as far as other portions of our code says, before you can be considered a resident, you have to at least be here for 30 days. Okay. Others establish. It's basically establishing what is the qualification to establish residency for somebody who's first moving here. Let's say someone who moves from another state, or someone who is legally comes to the country on a work visa, or is transferred from another company that has operation in a foreign country, who is legally here. Establishes that beyond just purchasing a home, right now it's just having property and with an intention of staying. This is some other qualifiers. If you have a permanent home and you intend on staying, if you're employed in a profession or occupation and here, or you enroll your children in school, it's kind of a starting point to say, okay, these are the qualifiers that you are intending on being here and staying. If you will, to kind of establish some criteria that you are here, because the homestead exemption is designed to reward those who are looking to have a long-term presence here in Georgia. So the intention is just to put some basic qualifiers in there as to what is establishing that residency, which I don't think is really well spelled out in this code section.
Other questions
Thank
for
you.
the
I was concerned because, anytime anyone qualifies for office, for example, you look where they have their homestead exemption. And if you think someone has not been there the requisite amount of time to be eligible. And so I wanted to understand if this language in any way impacted that or allowed somebody to have 2 exemptions or anything.
That's not the intention.
Wish it did. I'd like to get 2 if I could. Chairman Sims.
Mr. Chairman, this is both the you and to the author. This does not change what a resident is, as far as Hope Scholarship and all these other things. I'm just wondering.
Essentially does not, and I think the effort was made to not do that as far as legal residents are concerned, because that's the reason the language was taken out of the driver's license code for what's defined therein as a resident, the 30-day criteria. We discussed that in subcommittee because we also have the concept of domicile and those things in the law, which typically is a 6-month presence and intention to be there. Right. This bill speaks to intention to be there, but basically what this does is, in my opinion, clarify for our people in the trenches out there in Georgia the criteria on which they can refuse what we'll call illegal aliens the benefit of a tax deduction on homestead, what would otherwise be homestead property. I mean, it may force folks that are here illegally to seek legal status and accountability in this state, and I hope it does. I think the long and short of it is that the homestead exemption definition itself probably does this, but we have seen, just based on inquiries from tax assessors local governments that they read the law differently and maybe understand it differently. And this is an attempt by Representative Loudermilk, and I think a laudable one, to clarify that once and for all. That it's not the policy of this state to give favorable treatment to folks that are here illegally in lieu of Georgians, which we owe that obligation to on a day-to-day basis as their government. Other questions? Any comments, final comments by anyone? Hearing none.
Mr. Chairman, so this, by passage of this, we are changing with these last lines on page 1 and the top 4 lines on page 2. We're adding to the descriptors of who can apply for a homestead exemption. And this is, the intention is to narrow down who can apply.
Yes, ma'am.
Of those lines. I mean, the other 5 through 14 is crystal clear,
right,
in what you're stating. But these can apply to people that have never even stepped foot outside of the United States. These apply to native-born U.S. citizens.
It could be someone who moved here from California.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to be able to establish what is considered the starting point of residency here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just have to get the chairman's microphone, especially after 5 o'clock. I just think it needs to be said. I mean, I understand what Representative ORROCK is saying, but if you read B, you know, in reality, anyone that's establishing a home and would otherwise, be an applicant for number 1, I think would fit into B. It's perhaps somebody that this just makes it clearer. So I don't think your intent is to deny anyone an exemption who would otherwise be qualified. I mean, one is either going to engage in a profession, trade, etc., as in 2, or who, except for infrequent visits, has been in the state. I'm sorry, brief absence has been present in the state for 30 days. So I don't think your intent is to limit somebody that would be trying to grab an exemption that really was not, domiciled here, right? Your intent is not
Correct.
to take that away from anybody. Like, that's what we got in subcommittee, and
right. We're trying to be as specific and narrow as possible to not exclude anyone who would otherwise qualify.
And just one final, this is my ignorance, Mr. Chairman. Are you allowed to claim, I know you cannot claim 2 homestead exemptions within the state of Georgia. Can you claim one in another state of these United States and claim one here? You're allowed 1 and only 1.
That's correct.
So so these descriptors do not enlarge someone's ability to come here and have a homestead exemption somewhere in another state.
It's my opinion they actually narrow it. Because it says an individual who is unmarried or is a widow, whatever, and then it lists these in the aggregate. Right. All right. What's the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the proposition signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Abstain.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Abstain.
2 abstains.
2 abstentions.
Since we've got such a full committee room and members here on what's really not even a session day, first of all, I'd like to commend our members for your work ethic, being here on a day that would ordinarily be an off day. But I recognize our legal counsel from Legislative Counsel's office, but I didn't recognize another very valuable legal counsel of this committee sitting right to my left, and I hope we don't forget who's not only responsible for her legal opinion and all the hard work she does, but basically the general happiness of the entire committee and all the other people around here. How she does that without wringing some necks, I don't know, but I'm grateful she can find a way, and we sure do thank you. And also, I saw earlier there's our committee secretary and assistant Kay Goodrow over there, still here, who truly does an outstanding job, is totally committed to everything about this committee, and one of the greatest inheritances I ever could have had from Chairman Royal, and I thank him for that. he had a great choice of supporting cast, and then Scott Howard as a very welcome new addition over here as our intern. Scott, thank you for all your hard work too. We hope to be able to thank you all again and again, but sometimes we're negligent. We don't stop in our busy day, and thank those people that mean so much to us and undergird us and inspire us, really, in many cases. We certainly thank Michelle and Kay and Scott for that over and over again. Chairman Royal, do you have a report on House Bill 1502 from the Ad valorem Subcommittee?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. The Ad valorem Tax Subcommittee met on House Bill 1502 and gave it a resounding do-pass recommendation.
Which was certainly expected, and I recognize you, Chairman Royal, to present your bill. Please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was asked to carry House Bill 1502 by the Revenue Department and by the Director of the Forestry Association, and I'll go through the bill right quickly. On page 1, lines 16 through 20 is uniform documentation required by or asked for by the Revenue Commissioner. In the CUVA legislation, we required soil maps to be used to define different properties so that the state could place a value of the income production side of it, and a lot of counties didn't have soil maps, and so this allows the Revenue Commissioner to prescribe other appropriate sources or soil maps. On lines 21 and 22 is a notice of a possible breach could be required. It's May. On page 2, lines 7 and 8, it notifies the Commissioner of new appointments of the tax assessor within 5 days. Lines 23 through 26 removed the experience factor. Lines 26-28 requires 40 hours of training within 6 months and not 1 year. Lines 29 through 32 requires a certificate issued by the Commissioner. 33 through 36 is a continuing ed requirement of 40 hours every 2 years. Lines 1 through 4 on page 3 removes a 1973 grandfather clause. Lines 9 through about 15, the Commissioner specifies the qualification requirements and also the courses of instruction for the continuing ed. 16 and 17 of the line, the Commissioner has the authority to promulgate the rules and regs. Line 25, it just says that they will serve a no more than a 6-year term. If their term expires, then there will be another appointment from another assessor. Page 4, lines 1 through 6, it just says the county notifies the Board of Assessors of any change in the length of terms within 10 days of the resolution they adopted. Lines 8 through 11, no reappointment unless the Revenue Commissioner gives certification information to the Commissioners. Line 13 just says that any vacancy will be filled immediately and they won't be allowed to continue to serve. And I guess that's it, Mr. Chairman. I'll be glad to try to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll tell you, I am so delighted that the gentleman from the 171st took on this project. This is really heady stuff. I think you've even been called on to testify in court cases to interpret some of this very, very complicated and sophisticated law.
Especially on legislative intent, yes, sir. There are 159 different ways that the tax assessor's offices are administering the conservation use, especially, and it gets quite interesting.
I can imagine so. And in each individual case, it means a tremendous amount to the citizens involved in it. So I mean, it's
yes,
we try to deal with it at an academic level, but it's life or death to some people, especially our farming community and others in the conservation side of things and forestry and all those folks. These interpretations are of vital importance to our business community and to our families, and I certainly laud our chairman of Ad valorem Tax Subcommittee for taking on this project and improving the interpretation of a lot of what heretofore have been some very sophisticated concepts that needed interpretation. Are there any members of the committee that have a question for Chairman Royal? Representative ORROCK.
For clarification, Chairman Royal, so in addition to giving the commissioner some powers to prescribe soil maps and documenting eligibility for conservation use property, this also goes to the whole code section just around the requirements to serve as a tax assessor.
For the qualifications,
the qualifications.
yes, and then the terms and the type of educational requirements, or the type of courses to be provided. Yes, it certainly does, and it provides for continuing ed too, every 2 years.
Hopefully, we ought to get some continuity from that. And did you check with ACCG and others about that?
Yeah, that was my other question.
They're just delighted, yes, sir.
Is that right, Mr. Chairman?
How delighted did they get, Mr. Chairman? I'm curious.
They were in support of it. Several years ago, we also developed an appraisal manual. The Department of Revenue worked very hard on that, which has helped some, but we need some more direction. And I think the ACCG and GMA appreciates an attempt to try to provide the assessors more education, because the county commissioners get credit for whatever the assessors do.
Or the blame, credit or blame, right?
Well, same difference.
That's right, so to speak.
Final questions or final comments? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to pass.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Any further discussion? Last chance. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Chairman Royal. And Chairman Sims, I know y'all are going to hate this. This is our last bill on the calendar today. I think everybody that stayed with us the whole time here should get a special medal. Chairman Sims, do you have a report on House Bill 1506?
I do, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to say that I appreciate Representative Howson waiting us out. She's got a good bill here. Your sales tax subcommittee did meet and pass House Bill 1506 by committee sub, and moving on to the full committee.
I think we have a lady before us here presenting this bill that saw a wrong taking place that she wants to make right, and very late in the session, but nevertheless never too late when something's bad happening to Georgia citizens. So the chair recognizes Representative Penny Howson to present House Bill 1506.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to make some changes in the penalties when people knowingly and willfully try to defraud the state out of sales tax. And I'm sorry this was so late in the session, but this came to my attention when I went home last weekend, and I think the receipts on that I've just passed out to some of you is self-explanatory of what's happening across the state. We had this happened at 4 of our stores on one weekend, and so if 4 people in Nashville are doing it, I'm sure there are many others around the state that are doing it.
Just think what's happening in Alpharetta.
And
I remind the lady we are broadcasting these meetings on the internet, and these people can't see what you pass out. Cause could you tell us then what's happening?
Yes, thank you, sir. You will see that I passed out a receipt where someone went to purchase some cigarettes at a convenience store, and they were trying to arrange at a price of what they should charge for their cigarettes, so they asked for a receipt. And when they asked for the receipt, you will note that it's marked Lotto, $3.25, and we all know that you can't get a lottery ticket for $3. And then they purchased another pack of Doral cigarettes. It was $2.30, and it was marked Lotto. And if you come on down on the receipt, amount of sales tax charge is 0. And I just feel like that we need to stop this, and so I've presented with a bill to increase the penalty.
Will the lady yield for questions?
Yes.
Any member of the committee wish to ask a question? Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the Department of Revenue which prison they intend to put these people in.
That's a great question.
Well, if you'd see under present law, you could just be put in imprisonment for 3 months.
In the county jail.
In the county jail. But under this bill,
you can be fined up to $5,000 and 1 year in prison on the first offense. The second offense and subject to conviction, you can be fined up to $10,000 and up to 5 years in prison. And I'm looking for corrective action so this won't happen again, and that everybody will be on the same playing field. The people that will be abiding by the law will be on the same playing field as the ones that aren't.
Yeah, our business community that abides by the law and does things lawfully and honestly and with integrity, you know, they're punished by these folks that cheat. Not only is this a burden against our tax collections, and our local SPLOST and our eSPLOST and everything are damaged by this, but also our businesses are. It puts them in a non-competitive situation. And I'm grateful the ladies brought this legislation, and I think it's long overdue. Other questions from any member of the committee?
No, it doesn't say no.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Just a question, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if there's any criminal defense attorneys in here. I suspect not. But how does this level of punishment jibe with other offenses in our law books?
It's consistent with typical larcenies, high and aggravated. It's a misdemeanor at that level. The second offense, it becomes a felony, gets in the felony range. The high and aggravated is a misdemeanor level, sort of like DUIs, or a high and aggravated misdemeanor from a criminal standpoint. But it's couched with the words knowingly and willfully, and that's a pretty substantial burden of proof on the part of the prosecution to show willfulness and knowing of it. In other words, that's a difficult standard to get over. It's more than just a preponderance of the evidence. So it has to be pretty obvious, and I don't think any of our prosecutors are going to prosecute what could obviously be a mistake, but a lot of times these repetitive mistakes that just happen to inure to the benefit of the mistaker sometimes works itself into a knowingly and willingly situation. We've got a duty, all the businesses, treat them all fairly, and when we allow some to act unlawfully, we hurt all of them, and we hurt everything that our tax base is supposed to be dealing with. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Bill carries. Thank you, ma'am.